we're doing, and I look forward to doing that. So let's go.
Two questions for you. First off, hope you're doing well.
Thank you.
Yesterday, the interesting combination of Elizabeth Warren and Joe Wilson sent a letter to Secretaries Rubio and Bessent inquiring about the possible unwinding of broad sanctions on Syria, including investment sanctions, which leads to the question, where does the State Department stand right now on Syria? Is it more the European flavor of kind of opening up the arms a little bit? Is it Israel's view of staying away? It's too dangerous right now. If you can give an overview, it'd be great.
I can give you a little bit, certainly. I don't know if a full overview or not, but we are monitoring the Syrian interim authorities' actions in general across a number of issues as we determine and think about the future U.S. policy for Syria. We also continue to call for an inclusive civilian-led government that can ensure national institutions are effective, responsive, and representative. Local ownership and broad societal support is necessary for stability in Syria and the region, as recent deadly violence on the coast demonstrated. Long-term stability and prosperity for the people of Syria requires a government that protects all Syrians equally. Ultimately, the United States wants a Syria that lives in peace with its neighbors, respects human rights, and prohibits terrorists from using its territory as a safe haven. Clear designs there, clear parameters, easy to understand, and we're watching to see how they behave and how they react.
Second question for you. U.S.-South Africa relations obviously not good right now after declaring the ambassador persona non grata. A new issue arising now, the South African presidency putting pressure on the Johannesburg City Council not to move forward with an effort to rename the street upon which the U.S. consulate resides in honor of a Palestinian hijacker. That move by the South African presidency, is that as a result of direct pressure from the State Department, or is that being done on their own volition to try to mend fences?
Well, we have seen the reporting on the issue, and we don't comment on internal deliberations between really any city and its government, certainly the city of Johannesburg and the government, in this case, of South Africa. And perhaps South Africa would refer you to Johannesburg or South Africa for more details. But that's what I have for you.
Did state get involved in any manner on this?
That's what I have for you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Matt Lee, who's still, he's scrolling. He's scrolling.
I'm trying to find something, and I can't find it.
Well, welcome to my world. Yes, Nadia.
Thank you, Tammy. Two questions. On Sudan first, the army has took over the presidential palace. Do you see a change on the ground, and what is the U.S. position regarding this development? And second, on Gaza, the Israelis are declaring that they want to annex Gaza, or parts of Gaza at least. Is there any new initiative to bring them back to the negotiation table for the ceasefire?
Well, first on your first question, the SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces, they have retaken the presidential palace in Khartoum. The ongoing fighting in Khartoum further underscores the devastating consequences of the conflict for the people of Sudan, and we continue to urge the warring parties to cease hostilities and facilitate the safe, unhindered movement of life-saving humanitarian assistance. So, we're watching that. I think the world should be. Much of it is watching that situation, and that seems to be an important event. But we're watching and we're aware of it. As far as Gaza, look, we're still dealing with the efforts to have a ceasefire, which we had and was courtesy of Hamas, broken because of their lack of action on the parameters of the ceasefire itself. We, of course, stand by our ally Israel, as I mentioned, every day, happily so. And I certainly won't comment on or speculate on other hypotheses of what people think is going or not going to happen. I think the main goal is humanitarian supplies, the nature of the violence stopping. That is the sole focus of the nature of where we're at this point. I'm gonna. Well, I don't know.
Can I follow up?
But I'll get back to you. Say let's keep going here.
So today was
this is your last chance. Yes, sir.
Today was supposed to be the deadline for the visa review that was called for in the executive order. There's some indication that deadline may have actually been extended. Can you shed any light on that?
I can tell you that the deadline is now not today. I can't tell you the specifics, but it's, don't expect that to be, that today is a day that something will have to come out. Of course, what we do know is that, what I can say to you, is that the Department of State is committed to protecting our nation and its citizens by upholding the highest standards of national security and public safety through our visa process. As laid out by Trump's executive order, which is what initiated this dynamic, the visa adjudication process must ensure that U.S.-bound foreign travelers do not pose a threat to the national security and public safety of the United States. This was obviously a huge discussion on September 12th, 2001. And this is an issue that Americans care about and the nation's safety requires. The department, however, does not comment on internal deliberations or communications to the extent where, at least I can tell you that the deadline is not today.
Okay, and then just one other thing, which is also kind of it's a very brief thing, but you know, this lawsuit that's going on, that's been the topic of much attention about on the AEA, to deport.
Well, you obviously know I'm not going to speak to anything you're going to be asking me because it involves a legal process. Well, and a filing even today.
Well, I know, but it says that there are cabinet-level discussions about using a state secrets authority to...
Matt, you know, and that's
well,
fine.
I know, but I have to ask.
You do have to ask, and this is, I think, for everyone watching and everyone here, they're learning from you, unfortunately, that there's... that, yes, absolutely ask. That's part of it. Americans wondering, what is it you guys are looking at? What are you concentrating on? But also learning that when you've got a process within the legal system and also diplomatic conversations, et cetera, there are certain things that I can't speak about. And that's one of them. But thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Andrea Mitchell.
Hi, thank you so much, Tammy. The president acknowledged today that if there are mistakes that were made in taking some of the people to El Salvador, in the identifications of people, that they will be corrected. What are the efforts or the obligation of the State Department to follow up some of the complaints from families that their relatives were taken and are not gang members and do not have a violent history, to follow up with El Salvador? What rights do people have once they are taken to El Salvador and are in that prison under human rights and under State Department procedures when they are taken under the rubric of national security? Well,
a few things, of course. I don't speak for the White House or the president. He had some great comments to make earlier today, as you know, as you're referencing, and I think his comments speak for themselves. I also can't speak about the individuals who have been transported or legal mechanisms or diplomatic mechanisms regarding their status. But what I can say is that our relationship with President Bukele is excellent, that this isn't a situation where there's no communication or a relationship that doesn't continue on with El Salvador or the president. And of course, this is an issue that we also continue to focus on. So that I can tell you is, if the president mentioned it, I think that sends a signal, if not more so, about his commitment and the nature of what he knows and what he says he's going to do about it, and that's where we're going to leave it.
Let me just follow up, because the video certainly that was taken by El Salvador showed some harsh treatment. Mm-hmm. Does the U.S. feel any obligation in terms of human rights or legal authority when people are taken to another country, to a prison, to follow up on what the conditions are in which they're being held?
Well, again, that is also DHS. It's not the State Department's purview in that kind of a framework. Even the removing of people from the country, it's not the State Department's purview. That's a question for the DHS, but it's certainly not something I can even speculate on, or I'm not going to speak on the nature of El Salvador's process and how it handles the nature of the people that they repatriated.
They're taken under the authority of the Secretary of State.
Well, that was implemented by the Department of Homeland Security. So, yes. All right, now, Jen, yes.
Humera from
Humera.
No, that's okay.
This is, in all honesty, and if I was on Broadway, it might be a different situation. It's kind of hard to see. So you'll have to forgive me in the sense of that. Humera, yes.
Thanks, Tammy. Just a few follow-ups to colleagues' questions. You Nadia asked about Defense Minister Katz's comments about annexation. I just want to make it clear, does the Trump administration support Israel annexing or permanently holding territory in Gaza? And is the administration doing anything specifically to reopen the border for the flow of humanitarian aid?
Again, we're in a dynamic where there is diplomatic conversations happening. We're still working to implement ceasefires and dealing with issues and questions regarding what can happen on the ground when there's still hostilities and still conflict. I will not speak to or guess about what the president is going to do, what he's thinking. It's not my place. And the good news is we have a president and a secretary of state, as I've mentioned a few times, that are not shy men, that you will hear from them, and you do, courtesy of social media, courtesy of statements from this department or the White House. So it's certainly not my place. We want to have facts of the matter that I can state to you regarding our positions. And it is, I think, as I've mentioned to many of you, after 25 plus years of being on talk radio and television, where there is guessing or opinion, we can't do that. And so I'm clearly very strict in that regard.
One more.
Yes,
can I
yes,
have
sir.
one more on Syria?
One more on Syria.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for that serious statement. That might actually be the clearest and the first time that administration talked about Syria. So my follow-up is this.
Can I mention, though, in the midst of that?
Sure.
It is because of your questions, the nature of what your interests are, and the importance of what I think we encourage here when it comes to, there's all kinds of countries and cities that are in the news all the time, but things are happening all around the world that affect all of us. And it's that kind of a modern age, and it's exciting to be able to look for those answers and at least provide some insight. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
There is a big expectation for any sanctions relief that U.S. could give to Syria. Is this something the administration is thinking about, and what would it take to give sanctions relief to Syria?
There the sanctions dynamic has not changed, and there's no plans to change it at this point. But there is, so the existing measures that have always existed remain, and I understand why that's a question. But we have authorized Syria General License 24, which allows for transactions meant to help stabilize Syria. So it is not a blanket block, but the previous measures remain, but there is General License 24, again, that allows for transactions to help facilitate the stabilizing of that nation. All right, yes, sir.
You speak a little bit on Syria. I was wondering what's the State Department assessment on the new Syrian constitution that was drafted by the interim authority, which the draft was rejected by the minority groups, and they are saying that it has grants likely no rights of these minority groups, like Kurds and Druze.
So one thing I can tell you, we are following developments that Ahmed al-Shara signed, signed a so-called constitutional declaration, and note concerns expressed around consolidation of power by al-Shara. We continue to call, as I've mentioned in my first part of my statement, for an inclusive, civilian-led government to ensure national institutions are effective, responsive, legitimate, and representative. And we are continuing to watch the interim authorities' actions to see if they guarantee equal rights and treatment for all Syrians and preserve individual freedoms as outlined in that constitutional declaration. So we continue to watch, and I think that will bear out the nature of what it is we're dealing with. Bottom line, we continue to stand with the people of Syria.
And a question on Iran. You spoke about Iran too, and that the policy of this administration is very clear.
I'm sorry, I'm not here. Can you start again, please?
Yeah, sure. You spoke about Iran, and I think that the policy of this administration towards Iran is pretty much clear. But the Iranian has rejected direct talks with you. My question is that what other options are on the table when it comes to Iran and make Iran that not pursuing getting nuclear weapons?
Well, certainly sanctions, as we have applied, to say the least. Iran's behavior, as we know, across the globe threatens U.S. national interests, which is why President Trump has reimposed the maximum pressure campaign designated to end Iran's nuclear threat, curtail its ballistic missile program, and stop it from supporting terrorist groups. The president has made clear Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. And that includes, again, the sanctions of nations that are assisting that framework, the sanctions, again, on a company regarding China. There's a number of things diplomatically that can be done. This administration has been very effective in that regard, considering their position regarding stopping malign behavior, while also believing that wars have to end, to say the least. All right. Yes, Saeed, you asked before. Keep going.
Thank you, Tammy. Just to follow up on the annexation issue, because it's a big issue. It's been the American position, the steadfast official position, that no to reoccupying Gaza and definitely no to annexation. So do you feel that the U.S. is going to stick to this policy, or there's going to be some change regarding this issue? And then I have a follow-up on the humanitarian situation.
Well, and I know you ask, and I appreciate your passion and asking about the humanitarian situation. That's what we all think about. You know, we think about it here at State in a certain fashion, and you do yours. But again, when we think about rumors or suggestions or hypotheses or things talked about in the media, is not a basis for my commentary about whether or not something is or is not going to happen. What I've expressed to you what we do know is what is public and what is the policy of this administration, certainly that Secretary Rubio is committed to, which is ending bloodshed. Now, so there's the talk about annexing things, or that is, if anything, for those of you who care about these issues, it is a distraction to move past the nature of what's going on now with one cause, which is Hamas's attitude and actions. And while we have to deal with what is continuing and not happening because of their choices, we are continuing to try to stop that. So it's interesting that we can continue to keep in light, sir, just a minute, keep in our minds the nature of what's in front of us, which is still to stop the wholesale slaughter of people, the use of other individuals as human shields, the general chaos that causes, and the fact that there are ways to stop it. And that's what we're working on now. But others, perhaps, they want us to always talk about something else to get people distracted about that thing, so you stop looking at what is the thing that we need to deal with immediately. And I look to the Trump administration and to Secretary Rubio as examples of keeping their eyes on the prize and working methodically in this moment to get us to where we need to go.
Just
right.
to follow. Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's move. Yes, go ahead.
I'm going to switch topics, so if you want to stay on the region.
Well, all right. Well, thank you. We'll stay on the region then. Yes, sir.
Tammy just mentioned that your goal is to stop the war and to let the humanitarian aid get inside Gaza, and this is, I believe, a goal of everyone else. Mm-hmm. But according to the UN, Israel stopped aid from going through the crossing 20 days now consecutively. This is the longest since October 7, and this happened before the renewed airstrikes now. So there was no military operations in the region that prevent aid from going in. Do you feel that this is a collective punishment for Palestinians in Gaza to force Hamas to give some concessions? And is this acceptable?
Well, when you're asking me if I feel something, obviously I'm not going to go into a soliloquy of what I feel. What I can tell you is I also won't speak about a hypothetical or a separate report of what has happened with Israel. You would need to ask the Israeli government about if something occurred that you believe occurred or want clarity on. I don't speak for the Israeli government or for their prime minister. I speak for the U.S. State Department that has an interest in it. But you're asking a question we probably could discuss over dinner, but that's not a question for this podium or for what we are discussing here. What we do know, there are certain things that are facts of the matter, is that Hamas has put Israel and the world and the Gazan people in this position because of the madness, the savagery that they decided would be a good thing to do. I don't know what they thought would occur, but it perhaps is not what has occurred, which is a unity around the world after we saw that atrocity on October 7th. What we also, though, have done for everyone affected as a global issue, certainly first the Gazan people, the Israelis, etc., but as a global unified effort, is to stop the carnage. It's a meat grinder. It's people being used by others who just seem to certainly they're not focused on peace at the end. It is Hamas who needs to be asked certain questions about why this continues, because this has been their choice. There has been elements that have been agreed upon, other steps that the world came together to facilitate, that the United States was committed to, and they still abandoned it. Idan Alexander, when we talk about hostages who have been released or killers of Americans who've been extradited, there is an American who is still being held. The bodies of the dead being held. That is what is in front of us. This is what needs to be stopped. And that is what we're committed to. Yes, sir.
My question,
with the glasses there in the back. No, the gentleman in front of you, sir.
Yeah. So thank you. Daniela Compatangelo for Italian LA7.
Yes.
A question still about the meeting. If you confirm the meeting with the Israeli and the Americans next week here at the State Department and the White House, and if so, about Iran is going to be. That's from a report on Axios. So can you, if it's true, can you give us some insight?
Nice ending phrase there.
Yeah, can you give us some insight of what we're going to see?
No.
Or what?
If this is at the White House, as you suggested, well, I can't tell you what's going to happen at the White House, and I won't be confirming any meetings in this regard. All right, now you're ready, right? Let's do it.
Questions about this on Monday. It will have been almost a week since there was the announcement about termination of funds to USAID and broadcasters such as Voice of America and other grantees. As a senator, Secretary Rubio was supportive of the US grantee broadcaster Radio Free Asia. He protected it from cutbacks in the past. Does he want to revive the funding for Radio Free Asia, which broadcasts into countries like China, Cambodia, and Vietnam? And is he aware that due to the funding termination, a number of the journalists who work for Radio Free Asia are potentially could face deportation back to countries like China and Vietnam, where they may face imprisonment as a consequence of the reporting work that they've done for the US government by working for this outlet? And the same goes for Voice of America journalists, who also risk deportation back to countries such as Russia, Myanmar, Belarus, China, and Vietnam. Do you have a comment?
Well, I did have that question, and I have the question out to the Secretary. It's something that I'm following up with as well. It has been a story, understandably. You're interested in the answers to this. So I'm going directly to him. He's a busy guy, but I'm going to continue to look for that from him. What I can tell you also, though, is that we're reducing, clearly, he was elected in large part to reduce the federal bureaucracy, right? It's about waste and fraud, mismanagement. This is something that has to occur. And in any dynamic, there's going to be actions and tough decisions that have to be made. Many of us personally also have to go through that when you're looking at a budget. The president continues to take action to ensure the whole of the United States government, including executive branch agencies, are in line with the administration's policy priorities. And I've said before, and I have to keep saying, is that many things are fluid. And it's why it's good why you're here and why now we're doing this, 3 days a week. But also when we address the issue, as I asked about the issue of visas, there are people who are reporting certain things, and like in any situation, if you're in the United States and you have to leave, you can also apply for asylum. If you are in a situation where you believe your returning to your home country puts you at significant risk. We have clearly procedures where you can apply for asylum, and that is certainly if someone is coming from that workplace or some other situation, that's something that people can do. If you have a visa, and every situation is different. That's why we don't discuss individual visa dynamics. But if someone is here and it is a work visa, and it's their employment is ended, there's a period of time. It's like any other visa dynamic for anyone who holds a visa. And you can learn about that at state.gov. You can talk to, there's a whole host of people that can help you. And I would guess if you're here on a work visa, that was probably a complicated, semi-complicated procedure. And so you're aware of these things. And so this is what is obvious for anyone in this kind of a situation, especially for those worried about the nature of reporting or a dynamic where they're concerned about returning. There are options like that, and that, again, is a very basic situation for everyone in that kind of a situation. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Tammy. We'll follow up on Iran very quickly, then we'll move to Ukraine, if you please indulge me.
Sure.
You started highlighting some of the tools in your toolkit on Iran sanctions. I'll ask about a particular sanction law. There's a law of the land, which is called the Mahsa Act, which requires the administration to target Iranian leadership for their gross human rights violations. Is this administration willing to implement the Mahsa Act?
Is this administration what?
Willing to implement the act?
Well, I'm not, that would take me knowing what their thoughts are or discussing what diplomatic considerations are, issues that I'm certainly not going to speculate on. That's a hypothetical for the most part, and I can't do that.
Thank you.
Yes,
Moving to Ukraine, if I may. Very quickly, Tammy, on Ukraine. I was hoping you could fill us in on the delegation is headed to Saudi Arabia. I know very often...
Wait, you're going to have to stop. Maybe his mic can come up. Start again.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe a little bit more slowly, too.
Absolutely. I was
Thank
hoping you could fill us in on the delegation is headed to Saudi Arabia to discuss Ukraine. Michael Anton from this building is a part of the team. Anyone else you could mention, please? And also any reaction to overnight assault on Ukraine?
Well, I'm not going to speak about the particular individuals on the teams. All right? It is senior officials. It's not principals. But that's what we have. I think it's inappropriate to discuss certainly personnel, let alone senior officials who might be on a negotiation team. It's a dynamic that clearly we'll get the results from. We'll see the details, and then we can make some assessments about perhaps who was involved and where we go next. All right, now at the end of the row here, yes, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
My question is on Afghanistan. After 4 years, for first time, American delegate traveled to Kabul yesterday and discussed with the Taliban senior leader. My question is, does it mean the new diplomatic approach from United States towards Taliban? And can you clarify, aside that releasing American hostage, what other topics were discussed in this meeting with Taliban?
Well, I wasn't at the meeting with the Taliban. Even if I was, I wouldn't give you any details. If there was, certainly these are diplomatic considerations, and we have what the main end result, which I think is the North Star of this framework, is that an American is home. So that's what we have to care about. In the meantime, I think that there's a general series of issues that we're dealing with, but keep encouraging you to think about the nature of the subjects that are in front of us, that we're working on, that are steps in longer processes to not just keep Americans safe and get Americans home, but to change the condition of the world that's in front of us. All right, all the way in the back, gentleman with the white shirt, yes, please.
Thank you. Going back to the issue of Voice of America and global engagement media, the State Department was very active fighting disinformation, especially through the Global Engagement Center. They were very important in unveiling Russian state disinformation campaigns, Portal Combat and others.
Sure.
In the previous administration. I wanted to ask you if the Global Engagement Center is still active. How concerned are you that RT, Sputnik News, all that Russian disinformation outlets are going to be countered now without American state media to counter their narratives and what they have been doing in the past years?
Well, that is a stretch here, and I've mentioned this on Wednesday, that we do have a lot of very familiar structures and systems that are changing. And that doesn't mean that the work stops. It means that the efforts and the outreach and the engagement will look different, perhaps. But our values and what has informed the United States of America from day one through all of this time hasn't changed, and it's why we remain the greatest and the strongest country in the world. We can have these conversations, but while we're in the process of change in this fashion, it's the change of an administrative structure regarding taxpayer dollars as we assess, is the money we're spending, does it align with the values, with the agenda of the Trump administration that the American people overwhelmingly voted for to get things done? And it doesn't mean burning the house down. It means looking at how we can make it better, what needs to be changed, what needs to be reformed, so that we can spend money in a smarter, more efficient way. So yes, certain entities, certain buildings will be housed differently. Certain attitudes will perhaps change. But the goals and the attitude and the values of the United States not only haven't changed, they've been highlighted by the election of Donald Trump, a man who has brought back the notion of the idea that any American should be forgotten, that there should be no forgotten man or woman, that we have a responsibility to the world, but not in participating and facilitating wars, in doing things new and in a different way, and that includes within the structure of this government and how we apply our values. So I would argue that this is not it's not a retreat. Quite the opposite. This is a preparation to continue the work in a smarter, stronger way. All right, we'll take one more question. Yes, Alex.
If I could just follow up on my colleagues' questions, could you take us through the choreography of this weekend at these technical talks? Is it over multiple days? How are they dividing up the two different countries? And then I'll have a follow-up on the Taliban question as well.
Yes, this is held very close. This is all very serious, and so I'm not going to answer the details of how it's unfolding. When this is complete, I will pursue the nature of getting some answers and the specifics for that for you. And I do believe one thing I can say is, like with everything with President Trump and Secretary Rubio, things happen quickly. So I would suspect that we will have answers on this very soon.
Thank you. And then in terms of just the Taliban, and that was an unusual meeting. It wasn't just Adam Bowler, who's in charge of getting hostages out, but he was joined by Zalmay Khalilzad. Does he have a formal role within the Trump administration? And Palestinian-American billionaire Bashar al-Masri was also there. Can you clarify both their roles?
Yes. There is no one with an official government role. The gentleman you mentioned. This was certainly not a negotiation. There was no swap made. There was no thing given to accomplish this. As a matter of fact, other hostages from Afghanistan were released on the day of Trump's inauguration, so a little bit afternoon on the 20th. So I think this is, in addition to terrific envoys who know how to handle this situation, it is also the impact of a strong America led by a man who is known to do what he needs to do to accomplish his mission. And that is, I think, often an unusual situation. So I hope that answers your question.
Why were they there if they don't have official role?
Well, I can't speculate on that. That's something, though, at some point. But I certainly am not in a position to speculate about why they were. Yes, ma'am, the white jacket, and then that's going to be it for today. Sure.
After the Istanbul Mayor İmamoğlu's arrest this week, there are indications that Turkish government is now canceling the main opposition party's latest party convention and will appoint a trustee for the main opposition. What is the U.S. government's reaction to this? Because there are opinion reports mentioning that this operation came right after President Trump and Erdogan's phone call. Is this still internal legal process matter in your view?
What's your outlet again, by the way? Oh, great, great. Welcome aboard. Well, I can tell you a few things. First, we're following the events in Turkey, as you might imagine, including the reported detention of the Istanbul mayor and a large number of municipal employees, journalists, and other individuals. We would refer you to the government of Turkey for comments on internal judicial matters. And of course, it is worth reiterating that it's important that Turkey protect the freedoms and human rights of all of its citizens, consistent with the country's constitution and in line with our shared values and democratic traditions.
Corruption charges, mayor facing, of course, but how about appointing a trustee for the main opposition? Do you have anything on that?
Well, if that is going to come up, it's not, again, my place to discuss it or to surmise or to hypothesize either. I think that's going to be it for today. All right, everybody, we will be back on Monday. We will have our briefing on Monday and Friday next week. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. It's a beautiful day out there. Enjoy it.
being spent on overseas issues that is what is going on.
Damn good shoes, yeah. Shoes? Yeah. When you move your way, the world moves with you. Campus, move your way.
Every week, my clients in Asia hit me up with 2 queries. Frank, what's the best protein you recommend? And can you get it from the US? I just don't trust the protein brands in my country. I know what you're thinking. It's tough to trust protein brands when there are fake claims and adulteration around.
With zero accountability.
Muscle Blaze Biozyme Whey, the first and only protein in Asia tested and certified by Informed Protein USA. 100% blind testing standards every single month for protein accuracy, amino spiking, heavy metals, and doping substances, which means my clients are 100% sure of what they're consuming. Stop settling for protein that's not blind tested every month. Choose Muscle Blaze Biozyme Whey, built on science, trusted by 10 million consumers worldwide.
Welcome to In Conversation with David Frum. I'm your host, Sean Spear, editor-at-large at The Hub. I'm glad to be back in conversation with David for another installment of our bi-weekly video and podcast series on the key issues concerning Canadian policy and politics. In today's conversation, we'll cover some of the big issues of the past week, including Donald Trump's ongoing threats to Canada, Mark Carney's Liberal leadership,
it's nothing to do with the Irish people.
Being Prime Minister,
the illegal immigration racket is running ravage on the country. There are
tough times. We have to stick together.
Is running ravage on the country.
David, permit me, I'm excited to make an announcement. Given the unsettled times that we're living in and how much we've come to draw on your insights and wisdom to make sense of things, I'm pleased to report that for the next few months, In Conversation with David Frum will be released on a weekly rather than bi-weekly basis. I know our audience will be as pleased as I am about the news. So thank you so much, David, for agreeing to increase the number of times I get to talk to you each month.
I hope not to wear out my welcome. Thank you.
I want to start, David, with the extraordinary market reaction that we've seen to the Trump administration's policy chaos over the past week or so. Given that you're in D.C., why don't you just talk about the extent to which what's happening in the White House is starting to spill out into the broader economy?
Well, the Donald Trump, in Donald Trump's mind, it's forever 1977. And that's communicated to a lot of the people around him. They just don't understand how modern economies work. And let me give you an example of this. When J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, was campaigning in favor of tariffs during the campaign, he talked about how...
and the 40 million Irish Americans, as I said, need to hear this.
We don't care how many cheap toasters.
If not, there will be no place to come home and visit.
Except a million, he said, a million cheap toasters are not worth one American job.
Yes.
Now, as a matter of fact, I did the arithmetic on this. When toasters were American made back in the early 70s, a toaster cost about $1972.
Yeah.
Today, at Walmart, a toaster costs about $2025. So that's about a 90% reduction in the value of the toaster. So you get like $90 off per toaster times a million. That's 90 million. You're saying $90 million in improved welfare is not worth. What if they said to the guy who's in the toaster factory, tell you what, let's split this. You get half for the elimination of your toaster manufacturing job. But the real point of that story is they never mastered the idea that every product is a component inside another product.
Yeah.
So when you build, I was talking to someone who was doing some work in the auto industry. that the components, you buy a GM Chrysler Ford car, there are pieces in that car that have crossed the Mexican and Canadian border maybe 5 or even 6 times over the course of their life. You put a tariff on every one of those journeys, the whole project becomes impossible. And it isn't just that the car becomes expensive, it's that the just-in-time deliveries don't work. You have to have inventory. The whole thing just collapses.
Yes.
And that's true of not just automobiles, but so many other components. Trump's also been talking about giving away American export markers for agricultural goods. Before Trump's first term, the United States was the largest exporter of soybeans on the planet. That's now Brazil, because China pivoted. And Trump explicitly said that other agricultural exporters had better get used to selling to the home market. Well, how much feed corn can the American home market sustain? How much wheat can Americans eat themselves? These are all export markets. And I think the financial markets had this idea that Trump was just gassing, that he was just blathering. He just said stupid things, and that there would be some Jerry Cohn figure like in the first term to reel him back and realize, no, he's surrounded by enablers this time. It's really happening. And there are 2 other problems that he's got. One is in 2017, Trump was able to compensate for some of his other stupid economic ideas by giving a big tax cut.
Yes.
But that tax cut expires in 2025. To renew it, simply to renew the status quo, will take almost all the fiscal room and more that's available to the Trump administration. Any further stimulus would require deficits that are not only enormous, but that also would bust up the process in Congress for approving the deficits. So the financial markets are looking at some pretty grim realities. One more thing they're looking at is reductions in the labor force. And the Trump, good news, the Trump crackdown on immigration is looking to be quite effective. Bad news, the Trump crackdown on immigration is looking to be quite effective.
I want to take up your observations about competence, David, because whatever one thinks about the Trump administration, there was a sense in the early days after the inauguration, as it moved forward on a series of executive orders, that it had learned some of the lessons of the failures of the first administration. It seemed more capable at public administration, if nothing else. And it seems to me the experience of tariffs over the past couple of weeks have laid bare the underlying public administration incompetency at the heart of the Trump administration. What explains the difference between some of the actions we saw early on from the administration in different policy areas and the complete disaster that we've seen play out over the past couple of weeks on tariffs?
Well, I think they are more competent. I think that early perception was true. So in Trump 1, Trump arrived and he was surprised that he won. He didn't have much of an agenda. He was surrounded by people who, to the extent he had an agenda, didn't agree with it and tried to stop it. And Trump himself got drawn into these absurd quarrels with the crowd size at his inauguration.
Yes.
This time around, Trump has had a clear agenda. He wants to sell out Ukraine, and he wants to start trade wars with the entire planet. And he has been quite effective at doing both. Now, the reason it seems incompetent, which is not really the right word, is those policies are bad policies. When you are effective at imposing tariffs, you get a financial market crash. In Trump 1, Trump would have talked a lot about tariffs, but nothing would have happened and the financial markets would have gone up. So you'd had less competence, but more success.
Interesting.
This time, Trump's really done it. There are massive new tariffs being applied to all kinds of partners. And he succeeded. He did it in an administratively competent way. He was not thwarted by, remember the story about Gary Cohn? This may or may not be a true story, but snatching off Trump's desk the executive order to cancel the U.S.-South Korea free trade agreement. Whether that happened or not, the South Korea agreement was not canceled. This time, there's no Gary Cohn. This time, Trump is signing executive orders. And with some delays and pauses, some hiccups, he is doing what he said he would do. He was doing what his vice president said he would do. The incompetence here is on the part of Trump's backers, who are foolish enough to believe he didn't mean it and wouldn't do it. He's meant it, he's doing it, and the results are, as we see, disaster. But disaster is not quite the same thing as chaos. This is Trump's getting the outcome he wanted, not the results he wanted, but that's because the ideas are stupid, not because the execution is imperfect.
Well said. That's an interesting insight. If you permit me, I'd like to ask a bit of an insider question. Most of Trump's appointments have gone through the Senate process pretty smoothly, even in instances where it seems self-evident the individuals were unqualified. Elbridge Colby, who was to be second or third in command in Department of Defense, his nomination, by contrast, has experienced some resistance, including from Republicans. What are we to make of that, David? What does it tell us about the Trump administration's agenda and support for it or lack of support for it in parts of the Republican Senate caucus?
That is such an interesting question. I've pondered it. I don't know that I have a ready answer for you, but let me, for those who have never heard of him, let me just put in some background. So Elbridge Colby is the son of William Colby, son or grandson, who was director of the CIA in the 1960s. And he's a Harvard graduate. He's a very, very establishment person. And he's been hanging around the Washington policy world for a long time, where he's been positioning himself as a China hawk. And that is very suspicious of Chinese intentions, calling for a big increase in American confrontation to China. But in order to ingratiate himself with the Trump team, he's also become a big Ukraine dove. And because he's quite intelligent, he's able to write articles that are completely grammatical and full of English words that say, by selling out Ukraine, you will make the United States in a stronger position against China. Now, as I say, it's grammatical, it's full of English words, it's nonsense, but it's not grammatical nonsense the way you get from some of the other less presentable Trump people. And he's in line for a second or tertiary level appointment in the Department of Defense, and there's been opposition. And I find it baffling. I mean, if you've accepted putting anti-vax crackpot Robert Kennedy in charge of the anti-measles strategy, and we're having measles deaths, if you put Russia apologist Tulsi Gabbard at the head of the National Intelligence Agency, the director of national intelligence, if you have Donald Trump, friend of Russia, and J.D. Vance, even bigger friend of Russia, as president and vice president, why strain at Elbridge Colby in this tertiary position? Why is this an issue? So part of it, I'm guessing, maybe a personality issue. He has given offense to Senator Tom Cotton, who seems to be the senator who's put a hold on this.
Yes.
Part of it, maybe it seems like a safer way to register an objection to the pro-Russia tilt of Trump's strategy than opposing it. But it doesn't seem a very purposeful activity because, look, it's not that the fox is inside the chicken house. The fox is inside the chicken house, and the chickens are all dead already. There are a couple that are cowering in the corner, hoping to live a little bit longer, but most of the chickens are dead. And so now, the fox's assistant is here. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, perplexing.
It must be about personalities.
Another thing that's perplexing for a lot of our Canadian listeners and viewers, David, is the preoccupation with Canada. I was speaking to a well-placed American conservative political and policy observer yesterday who said to me that in most circumstances, one can discern the causal source of Donald Trump's preoccupation. Someone says something on Fox and Friends, or Tucker Carlson says something on his YouTube show. But the case of Canada, it's harder to discern why the president has spent so much of his time focused not just on tariffs, but these escalating threats of annexation and absorbing Canada as the 51st state. Are you able to shed any light on where you think that's coming from and why the president has dedicated such disproportionate time to these questions so early in his presidency?
Well, let me give you some guesses. So first, I have an article in The Atlantic on Wednesday that it was an answer to those who tried to look for large strategic visions in foreign policy. It's malice, it's animus, it's ignorance. The Trump people will say, well, we're trying to put together a big coalition against China. They've slapped Australia with all kinds of tariffs, and Australia is, along with Japan, maybe your most important partner in the Indo-Pacific for confronting China. The idea you would antagonize Australia. So the things that Trump apologists in academia and public life say are not really explanations because they don't line up with the behavior. I think, and in Canada, they don't even try because it seems so crazy. A couple of things may be going on. First, remember that scene at one of the G7 meetings, I think in England in 2018, where Justin Trudeau was caught on a mic making jokes about Trump to Johnson and Macron. Johnson and Macron were laughing, but it was Trudeau who was making the jokes. Not impossible that has been rankling with Trump ever since. It's also true that on certain parts of the American hard right, annexation of Canada has been a dream for a long time. Tucker Carlson has often talked about annexing Canada. Pat Buchanan, back in the 90s, talked about annexing Canada. Because to put this bluntly, they haven't been keeping up with Canadian demographics, and they see Canada as a strategic reserve of white people, and a way to balance the browning of America from Southern immigration is to annex Canada, and you bring in more white people. Now, the idea that Canada is no more white than the United States is, they haven't quite kept up with that news. But that's a big part, I think, of what is going on. It's about racial rebalancing, and and that and there's a complete lack of interest in Canada as Canadians, because if you say, I mean, look, the whole thing is so demented. It feels, again, to quote something I've written, the whole thing, it's too ugly to make a joke about, but it's too stupid to talk seriously about it. But they have to understand, if you did somehow pull Canada or parts of Canada, the United States, unless you're going to rule them as subjugated territories, which doesn't seem very plausible, they have to have senators, they have to have members of the House, and they will all be Democrats, and they'll all vote to convict Donald Trump at his next impeachment trial. So how does this make any sense? But if you understand it as an expression not of a plan, but of deep animus and of this racial fantasy, I think you're on your way to understanding something.
Well, you mentioned Australia in your answer, David. I want to take up what we've seen out of the administration towards Australia in recent days, and why you think it's important to understanding the inherent limits of the Trump administration's foreign policy when it comes to building a broader coalition to ultimately confront China.
Well, compare Canada and Australia in this way. Canada is bound to the United States no matter what.
Yes.
Nobody's away. Australia is very far away from the United States. Australia now does almost 4 times as much trade with China as it does with the United States.
Yes.
And China is really no kind of is very far away from Australia too, so it's no kind of direct strategic threat. So one of the things you would worry about if you're a big strategic thinker is, will there be drift? Will Australia be pulled gradually into the Chinese orbit as their most important customer and as a supplier of capital, and away from the United States? And against that, you would say, okay, well, maybe they're bound to China by ties of trade, but with the United States, they're ties of history, they're ties of values. And so your message would be, well, let's accentuate the ties of history and values. Let's emphasize these shared, the things that we share, to compensate for the increasing gravity of the economic pull to China. What Trump has done is say, no, we're not going to do that. Instead, what we're going to do is sever even more the economic links between the United States and Australia. They do nearly 4 times as much business as China with us. Let's make it 5 times and see what happens then. And it just seems reckless. At the same time as they're alienating Japan, the Japanese prime minister came to the United States during the Biden administration, gave a speech to a joint session of Congress in which he talked about how the defense of Ukraine is important to Japanese security. The Japanese do not agree with the theory that by jettisoning Ukraine, you somehow make the United States more credible vis-a-vis China. He explicitly said the opposite. And Japan has been a generous supporter of aid to Ukraine because they see security is indivisible. But the Japanese are going to be put off too. The South Koreans are worried by Trump's enthusiasm for North Korea. So in every area of the globe, what Trump is doing is dissolving historic bonds, and it looks often like the only allies he wants are Russia, Saudi Arabia, and El Salvador.
Yeah. If I could just say in parentheses, David, one thing that has struck me is the inherent dissonance between the Trump administration's self-image as a populist nationalist movement and its inattention to nationalist sentiments within the countries that it's antagonizing. It seems to me that there's a sense that countries like Canada will go through some type of rigid cost-benefit analysis to come out the other side with the decision that, notwithstanding these provocations, it's still in Canada's interest to be part of the American orbit. And that strikes me as a pretty big risk, given the rise of nationalism in Canada and in many of the other countries that you've mentioned.
And that's not their worst miscalculation. Their worst miscalculation is the one they're making in Mexico. And that is one that could be really costly, where there are people in the Trump world who are thinking, we are going to fly drones equipped with missiles over Mexican territory, and we are going to hunt and kill fentanyl merchants in Mexico, with or without the consent of the Mexican government. And the Mexican cartels are not going to retaliate in any way at all inside American cities. One of the big Trump talking points is they want to declare the cartels international organizations.
Yes.
And in some ways they qualify. understand that doing this is a step toward the militarization of the campaign against the cartels, and not only militarization, but the Americanization of the militarization of the campaign against the cartels.
Yes.
The cartels have gone very far to the way to avoid direct confrontations with the United States because they're afraid of what the Americans would respond. But if the Americans lead with a militarized campaign inside Mexico against the cartels have considerable retaliatory capacity. You could find yourself with a criminal terrorist insurgency inside the southern United States. Bombs going off in shopping malls. And I don't think the Trump people think about this at all.
Yeah, the designation of cartels has been one of the, as terrorist organizations, has been one of the demands that the administration has made of Canada, which is a good segue to a question I wanted to put to you about Canada's response in recent days. No doubt, David, you saw the threat by Ontario's Ford government of shutting down or reducing electricity exports to the United States. That decision has been paused in recent days in exchange for a meeting next week, I guess, between our federal finance minister, Dominic LeBlanc, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford. What are you to make of that episode? And more broadly, David, as a Canadian, someone who's followed Canadian policy and politics closely for a long time, what do you make of the increasing role that provincial premiers and provincial governments are playing in these interactions with the Trump administration? Is that a good thing or a bad thing in your mind?
Well, I think the provincial presence is a little bit of an inevitable reaction to the Canadian electoral cycle.
Yes.
Which is there isn't really a federal government right now. There hasn't been since the beginning of the year, and there won't be for another 6 or 8 weeks. So in the absence of a functioning federal government that's not in electioneering mode, the provinces step up. I think there's also something quite elegant about the Ford move, because it's kind of a 1-2 punch. I looked it up the other day. Ontario's electricity exports to the United States are dwarfed by Quebec's. Quebec is the big exporter, not Ontario. When you hear Rob Ford say, or when you hear people say that Ontario exports could affect as many as 1.5 million households in Wisconsin and New York and Michigan, you know what? That sounds like a big number. It's not. So the Ontario threat is a demonstration effect. Then the role of nickels in the glove is the unstated threat. Quebec could do the same thing, could apply the export tax, and that would really hurt. That would really hurt. And that hurts not a ring of states around, not 1 million households in 3 or 4 states around the Great Lakes, but that would affect millions upon millions of households in New York and New England, where they are a giant exporter.
Yes.
And that's, by the way, what is so demented about this whole aluminum threat. Aluminum is just congealed electricity. And the reason Canada has an advantage in aluminum is because of the abundance of hydropower in the province of Quebec. That's not something that is going to change with tariffs. All that's going to happen is you tariff Canadian aluminum, you raise the price of American aircraft. You raise the price of American aircraft, you raise the price of American airline fares. You raise the price of American airline fares, you raise the cost of doing business in every... there's this whole house that Jack built problem with protectionism. You can't just raise one price, you raise every other price through the whole economy.
Well said.
One of the things that is so weird about the Trump administration is it's dominated by all these tech bros who grew up reading Ayn Rand, and then they get to power and they act like the villains, not the heroes in an Ayn Rand novel.
That, I think, David, is our title for today's episode. You mentioned Canada's political dynamic, and I have to ask you, since we last spoke, Mark Carney won a decisive victory in the Liberal Party leadership race, and all things being equal, will be sworn in as Prime Minister before we speak next week. What do you make of Carney's victory and ascendancy to the prime minister role, even if it's temporary before we have a forthcoming election? And what should we expect in your mind from a Prime Minister, Mark Carney?
I'm going to do a little bit of an I told you so lap on this one. So one of our, back before Trump was elected, and we were talking more about strictly domestic Canadian politics, one of the warnings I sounded again and again was that it was very dangerous for an opposition party to do too much to define itself in a Westminster system. Very much dangerous to define itself too much, too far in advance of the election, because you don't know what the issues are going to be. So all the definition will be is a liability to, or a potential liability, and very unlikely to be an asset, because the success of an opposition party really is contingent on the failure of a government. And so we've seen in Canada where the Conservative Party became convinced that populist politics was the wave of the future, took on a series of stances that seemed to play well in the context of the aftermath of COVID, supported the trucker boycott, the trucker seizure of Ottawa, and built a brand identity. And then Trump wins, and Trump starts threatening Canada. And that brand identity is now nothing but a liability. And it was completely unnecessary because had they just not committed themselves in this way, today they would be ready with the issues that are going to be the voting issues of 2025 to take stances how to defend Canada against the economic and other threats from the United States. And the huge move in the polls is a product of the strange thing with the Liberals. The people who've been in power since 2015 got to present themselves as something new.
Yes.
Whereas the out party, the opposition party that should be the something new, is stuck with a brand identity forged under completely different circumstances in 2021. There's now a big liability in 2025.
Yeah, well said. The ballot question has fundamentally shifted, as you say, and the Conservatives are struggling to find their voice on the singular issue that will ultimately decide the forthcoming election, which is really about which party is best positioned to protect Canadian interests vis-a-vis the Trump administration.
And I want to say, Canada First is a bad answer to the slogan America First, because it's not it says we're the same people just across the line. And that the point of what is wrong with America First is not that every other country should also seek to be first. What's wrong with that slogan is that what we've all learned since the Depression and the Second World War and through the Reconstruction afterwards is the way you protect democratic values is by collaborating with your fellow democracies. America First is a bad slogan because it means America alone. And Canada First is an even worse slogan because it means Canada alone, and Canada can afford to be that even less. The answer to what Donald Trump is doing is to reaffirm the importance of free trade, collective security, the alliance of the democracies. And you can get off on a really wrong foot by saying we want to be chauvinists for a smaller nation.
I want to ask you the question in the aftermath of Carney's leadership win. A pollster in Canada tweeted something. I'm paraphrasing, but something like, "The next election will be decided by which party could present itself as more persuasively anti-Trump and anti-American." What do you think of that characterization, and what, in your mind, are the risks with an election campaign that has the different parties trying to outcompete themselves to who can be more anti-American than the other?
Is 50% of passing or a failing grade on an answer? Because that's 50% right. If for sure the parties need to be non-Trump. You know, it's not even 50% right, because the point is not to be anti-Trump. The point is to be not Trump. And the point is also, Canadians are not anti-American. Canadians want to get back to the America they know and admired and respected and did business with, the America that's a partner. And so the job of the next Prime Minister of Canada show, I know how to navigate past today's crisis in a way that doesn't make this problem worse, but makes it better. Trump and I remember what America was. I believe in what America could be and will be again. I have a plan to get us from here to there. I absolutely will defend Canadian interests, and Doug Ford has been doing this very effectively. When if they tariff the steel, we put taxes on their electricity. We hit tit for tat, but always, and this is the thing that Doug Ford has done so well, always with a goal toward the restoration of trade peace. That we're not here to win this trade war, which of course Canada cannot possibly do. Yes. We're here to mobilize enough awareness in the United States of what a folly this Trump project is for people on both sides of the border. And it will hurt Canada more, it always will, but it will hurt Americans too. And it's unnecessary and stupid and is poisoning America's relationships with other allies like Australia that they also need. So the goal isn't to be anti. The goal is to be in favor of the ideals of democratic defense, in favor of the ideals of global cooperation, in favor of the ideals of free trade. That's why Ukraine is such an important issue beyond the importance of Ukraine itself, is it symbolizes the unity and cooperativeness of the Western democracies. And He
registered his candidacy for the Irish presidential election scheduled for later
David, that's
this
a message
year.
I could vote
However, his
for,
bid faces significant
and get
legal
excited
and
about it.
political
Well, I just
hurdles
wanna
that
wrap
may
up
prove
with one
difficult
final
to
question.
overcome. The first
This
major
will probably be
challenge
the last time
McGregor
we speak
faces is
before,
securing the necessary
Prime Minister
nominations
Justin
to
Trudeau
run.
exits the
To appear on the
political
ballot,
stage.
McGregor must obtain
We
support
talked a
from
bit about
either
his
20
legacy
members of
when he first
Ireland's
announced that he would
Oireachtas, the
resign
Parliament,
in
or
January,
from
but
4
why don't I
local
just ask you to
councils.
reflect a bit
Political experts
on,
believe that
Prime
securing
Minister
these
Trudeau's
nominations
legacy
will be an
and what
uphill
the
battle
lessons
for
you think
McGregor.
are
Most
for
members of the
both the Liberal Party
Oireachtas are
and Canadian
affiliated
politicians
with
more
political
generally.
parties, and it is highly unlikely they
fiscal
will
management
support his
can be corrected by
candidacy.
better fiscal management.
Furthermore, 4 local
But there are two things that Trudeau is leaving for the long term. One is the underperformance of Canadian productivity. He just never took that on, or maybe he didn't have ideas about how to do it. And as we said before, his idea was if you admit lots of immigrants, that you can make up with by adding more factors of production for the failure to improve the efficiency of the factors of production you have, extensive, not intensive growth. So that's one of his legacies, is the failure to grapple with Canada's most important economic problem. And the second has been his validation of this attack on the country's identity, and these slurs on its history, these slurs on its character. And I think Trump is reminding Canadians of what they're proud of, and this confrontation should cast an even worse retrospective shadow on the defamation of Canadian history and the builders of Canada that was such a part of the Justin Trudeau government's ideological message. It wasn't something they intended, I think. They just got drawn into it, but they never had the character and strength of will to say, no, we're not, we're certainly going to compensate people who are harmed in the residential schools. The Harper government did that, and if more compensation is called for, but we're not going to engage in this national self-destruction, this national self-libel. And that, I think, that may not be enduring, because I think Trump is fixing that problem very fast, but it's a legacy. It's not a good one.
David, man, we covered a lot of issues and topics in this conversation. I want to thank you for joining me, and as importantly, I want to thank you for agreeing to extend these conversations on a weekly basis over the next few months, which are no doubt going to be involve a lot of turmoil both domestically and globally. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me, and I look forward to catching up in a couple of weeks.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
I'm a mango. I'm a mango. Fruity finish.
तुम्हें भी फन चाहिए?
Yes. Mango. Yeah.
Mango fruity, fresh and juicy. Too much fun.
यार मैं बोलना भूल गया था, पर वो दिन मैं म्यूचुअल फंड लेने के बारे में सोच रहा था। फिर क्या, कंफ्यूज हो गया। सब सेम ही तो है, ये ले या वो ले, क्या ही फर्क पड़ता है?
फर्क तो पड़ता है, क्योंकि फर्क है, बस देखने का नजरिया बदलना होगा, क्योंकि फर्क तो है।
इन्वेस्टमेंट फिलॉसफी से लेकर अटल विश्वास तक, आसान प्रोसेस से लेकर ट्रांसपेरेंट सर्विस तक, हर चीज में आप फर्क पाएंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व म्यूचुअल फंड, फर्क है। म्यूचुअल फंड निवेश बाजार के जोखिमों के अधीन है। योजना से जुड़े सभी दस्तावेजों को ध्यान से पढ़ें।
All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast, and I'm happy to welcome back friend of the show, David Fromm. He's a staff writer at The Atlantic and the author of Trumpocalypse. David Fromm, great to see you.
Thank you.
So here we are, I don't know, what are we, month 2 now of the Trump administration? Yeah. It's been a wild ride. What so far would you say is the most consequential of all the many things we've seen?
Well, I've been thinking about that question because it doesn't have one answer. Maybe there are two. So there's consequential in what has the greatest impact on the lives of most Americans, and that is the reckless economic policy, the trade war, which is going to raise costs and push the economy into stagflation or even outright recession. But another way to think about the question, what is the most consequential, is what will be the hardest to undo? Because 20 years from now, no one will remember or care whether there was a recession in 2025. And I think many of the immigration outrages that the Trump administration is committing will end up with lawsuits and litigation and payouts to people improperly detained or improperly incarcerated. I think the hardest thing to get back will be America's credibility as a provider of security to allies. That's always going to be there. And a thing I've been paying attention to is the way foreign allies are beginning to rethink whether the United States can be trusted as a provider of weapons. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in a NATO country. I was able to talk to the defense minister. They had a big defense program readying for new purchases, and they were turning against American equipment because they didn't trust America to be a safe security provider.
A lot to unpack there. Let's start with the economic side. You mentioned the term stagflation. Why don't you tell us what that is and how that's different than inflation?
Yeah. Okay, so this is where we oldsters can provide a service. So one of the things that people used to believe back in the ancient times, in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s was, there was inflation, there was recession, but not both. You wouldn't, if you had inflation, that meant you had an economic boom, maybe too big a boom. If you had a recession, at least the prices were stable. And that seemed to be true from the Great Depression until the 1970s. And then in the 1970s, there were these years from 1973 to 1982 where you got both. You got both very slow growth, often outright recession, and inflation. And so they coined the term stagflation to mean stagnation plus inflation. And that seems to be what we're heading toward, that the Trump tariffs are going to push up all kinds of prices in ways I think economic reporting doesn't help us with, because the reporting focuses on final goods like a tomato or an avocado, and not understanding that Trump is raising the price of things that go into other things. When you tariff aluminum, when you tariff glass, you push up the price of every other good in the economy almost. But we're going to have slower growth, the Federal Reserve says, down from in the last two Biden years, growth was in the high 2%, and we're now maybe going to have 1% for 2025, maybe less. And given that the population is growing, 1% growth isn't going to feel like anything to very many people.
And correct me if I'm wrong, David, but stagflation is it's like quicksand, right? Because some of the policies that you might use to solve a recession will worsen inflation. Some of the policies you might, or instruments you might use to solve inflation will worsen the recession.
When you're in a recession, one thing you can do is borrow money from the future and have government spending to rev up the economy. The problem is that will also accelerate inflation. Okay, so if you focus on the inflation piece, one thing you might do is raise interest rates to cool the inflation. But of course, that will make a weak economy even weaker. So as you say, the tools, the most obvious tools, become kind of unworkable. And that was the predicament policymakers had through the Nixon, Ford, and Carter years and into the Reagan years. We're seeing that now. The Federal Reserve was intending to cut interest rates in 2025, which would have been a big boost for home buyers and car buyers. And they're now, it looks like, not going to do any more rate cuts because they're so worried about Trump price inflation.
So I guess one question would be, does Trump, because if this happens, right, that's bad news for Trump, it's bad news for Republicans. If the economy, the thing that Trump ostensibly won on, if that starts to go south, that's bad news for Republicans. Does Trump walk back from the tariffs at that point, mitigating this problem? Or is there some weird end game where he firmly believes that we have to go through, you got to go through the pain before you get to the game? What's the deal?
Imagine like being some kind of visiting missionary in the tent of Attila the Hun to say, Mr. Hun, obviously there's a lot of short-term payoff from your strategy of raiding, killing, pillaging, raping, murdering, stealing. But, if you really focused on education and creating a free trade zone here in the Hun Empire, you could really boost long-term growth much more than you would get from, he'd look at you like a lunatic because pillaging is what he knows. So it is with Donald Trump. He doesn't believe that there can be an exchange where both people walk away a winner. He doesn't believe that. In any exchange, there's a winner and a loser. He's made that very clear. You have a deal, either you win. If the other guy is happy, that means you lost. So the whole logic, not only of free trade across borders. But if any kind of economic exchange within borders baffles him, he's a predator. He thinks like a predator. So it's not impossible that, as happened in the first administration, that if things get bad enough forces can sort of squash them. But bear in mind, the single most important person other than Trump in the administration, Elon Musk, is a maker of electric cars that are under intensifying threat from superior Chinese competition. So Musk's thinking is going to become increasingly protectionist too. His company is not going, with its hugely inflated stock price. I think even after the recent slide, it went to near $400 a share. Now it's in the 230, something like that. It's still trading at over 100 times earnings because of assumptions of future growth. But if you get into a Tesla, it's visibly a 10-year-old car. And there are better and newer models, and the Chinese models are cheaper too. And so you're going to have two people at the top who both fear and dread fair competition.
Yeah, I don't know that much about electric vehicles, but I recently heard that one of the problems is that Tesla, so the goal in terms of investment is, auto-driving cars, automatic, basically with driverless cars, and that Tesla is only using cameras, which are flawed when it comes to, crashing into children and stuff, whereas maybe China is using cameras, but other methods of sort of gauging their surroundings. Do you know anything about that?
Just the slightest piece, which is that Uber is doing a big experiment in the Bay Area with autonomous vehicles, and they're using Chinese cars, not Teslas. And I think what we've all gotten a glimpse of from Elon Musk is this is not a safety-conscious individual. This is not a detail-oriented guy. This is a guy who says, if you've got a server in the corner and you don't know what it does, unplug it, and then you'll find out. His approach to the U.S. government tells you something about his approach to auto safety. I'm not sure I want to get into an autonomous Tesla machine from a guy who fired all the nuclear safety workers without knowing what they did.
It just stuns me. It just stuns me that Trump and Musk have both become wildly successful by following almost all the wrong lessons of leadership and management.
Yeah.
And obviously, at some point, maybe it's the presidency when you hit the ceiling where there are, where it ceases to work. But it's just.
Well, Musk
it's got to be like a moral hazard to have them in these positions.
Well, Musk and Trump are very different individuals. I mean, Musk was obviously a super capable person at an earlier age, but with skills that were very good for solving certain kinds of problems, which is how do you get a new enterprise off and running, where he made decisions like, let's break rules and count on being billionaires by the time anybody enforces the rules on us, and then we'll be able to pay whatever the cost of the rule breaking was. He also has been taking a heavy drug regimen for a decade and a half. So you start out, he's now in a different situation. He's now got a different problem. He's not in the creative phase. He's in the phase where you have to take an electric vehicle, make it autonomous, and that requires precision engineering, zero tolerance for error, some understanding of the way human beings are. And that's a different thing from what made him so successful in the first place. Plus, there's the drug regimen. And now absolute power over the United States government with no responsibilities because he doesn't have to worry about losing. No one's going to vote Elon Musk out of power. We can't do that. We can't even impeach him because he doesn't have any official role in the United States government. So he's got power without responsibility. In Donald Trump's case, there's more. He's just, he wrecked the legitimate family business early. And ever since then has been in one form or another of exploiting and taking advantage of people, at which he does have real skills. So that takes you a certain far, but it's a different sort of business problem than the Elon Musk business problem.
So back to the question about what has been the most consequential thing that's happened. So the economy, the tariffs are one part of it. Then you mentioned basically Donald Trump ending America's leadership role in the post-World War II, consensus world order. You are from Canada, right?
Yeah. I have a
You
house there.
must
I still
have some. Is Canada now part of the axis of evil? I'm not sure.
So I spent a lot of time in Canada, very involved in Canadian life there. I have a house in Ontario. I think Americans tend to, when they think about Trump's threats against Canada, they think of that John Candy movie, Canadian Bacon, and they tend to treat it like a